All right, so Fox is used to pushing lies without any accountability, but that's finally starting to change. The New York Times reports that Dominion Voting Systems' $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against Fox is inching closer to trial, and Fox Corporation owners Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch are expected to sit for depositions as soon as this month. The lawsuit names anchors Lou Dobbs, Maria Bartiromo, and Jeanine Pirro for their lies about Dominion in the wake of the 2020 election. Here's what they said back then.
This election, a lot of strange things happened, and many of them highly suspicious. For example, Dominion Software.
They have businesses in Venezuela, Caracas. They have businesses in Cuba, and there are also links to China.
A company called Dominion, which they say started in Venezuela with Cuban money and with the assistance of Smartmatic software, a backdoor is capable of flipping votes. These are serious allegations.
All right, but when legal action seemed imminent, the hosts backed off, running pre-recorded segments debunking their own lies. It's a pathetic attempt to cover themselves, because that's exactly what it was. Now, fellow far-right networks Newsmax and One America News also walked back their lies when they were faced with similar lawsuits. Look, these networks love to spew lies, not news. But when legal liability hits them, we finally see who they really are. Aaron Haynes and Adrian Elrod are back with me, and we're also lucky to have Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and MSNBC legal analyst, to join the conversation. Joyce, I'll start with you. How monumental will this case be for the First Amendment?
Well, defamation lawsuits are powerful tools, and it's unusual to see one deployed in precisely this way because the facts are so very one-sided in this situation. One suspects that there would be a lot of pressure on the Fox News defendants to settle the case short of trial. Although settlement can be painful, going to trial almost guarantees a broader exposure of the sorts of really Kraken lawyer fever dreams that were being spread here. In terms of the First Amendment, this, of course, is a way of getting into the marketplace of free speech and drawing lines that make very clear just how serious our prohibitions against defamation of people continue to be in law. One of the most, I think, really eclectic and very fitting elements of this sort of law is that plaintiffs are entitled to get some form of truth-telling from defendants in the same forum where lies were told. We've seen, as you indicated, some beginning efforts in that area, but it only gets worse if this case goes to trial.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that really quickly, which is, I know that, we think of news organizations as having, and I don't consider Fox a news organization, they certainly have the moral obligation to at least tell the facts or to talk about the news in a factual way. It's not a crime to lie, is it?
Well, this is a very interesting slice of that sort of behavior. It's not talking about criminality. It simply says, in the language of the law, that you've committed a civil tort against me, Dominion, that you've defamed my business, that you've told lies and in many ways impacted my ability to earn a living, or you've impacted my profits, my bottom line. And so I'm entitled to compensation from you. And so the lawsuit proceeds very much in that vein, along that civil liability track that punishes people who intentionally or with gross negligence lie about people in these sorts of civil settings.
Aaron, I mentioned that Fox has a moral obligation to tell the truth. They certainly do not do that. But talk to me about the dangers of the disinformation and the disinformation machine and what that does to the overall erosion of our democracy.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Eamon, for Fox News viewers, Fox News is their trusted source of information, if not news, right? So that is where they are going to get information. And so if that information is inaccurate, what are the consequences of that for our electorate, for our society? That is also, kind of a question that we'll be exploring, at least in the court of public opinion, as this case goes on, if not in an actual court of law with the civil liability trial. And as Joyce said, this is about the harm that was done to Dominion, but also I think that this case is raising questions about what the harm done to our society, to our democracy is when you have this kind of misinformation being put out there under the guise of simply covering politics. So much of this year has been about really getting to the truth in public about the big lie, right? Whether we're talking about the January 6th committee hearings or, these ongoing investigations in places like Georgia and now on trial in criminal and civil court.
Adrienne, to Erin's point, I mean, you can almost draw a straight line. I mean, look, we know for a fact, and you can certainly make the case that the lies that were amplified by the network, they served as the basis of the belief system that led to the January 6th attack. I mean, they did not start the big lie, but they certainly did not stop it. They did not debunk it. They knew it was false. Is it too much to ask that these hosts have a bit of remorse?
Yeah, no, it's certainly not too much to ask, Eamon. And look, you've done some amazing coverage of, some of the people who were impacted and sort of became, transfixed by Donald Trump and became part of the January 6th movement. So you know better than anyone, how this phenomenon has taken shape. But look, here's the bottom line. We all know this. Fox News is essentially an extension of the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. And Republican voters know, the Republican Party knows that they're losing voters by the day. They're basically becoming the party of the old white man, essentially. So the only way that they can win these elections, the only way that they could possibly win in 2024 is to disenfranchise voters, especially voters of color, and to support fraud in the electoral process, and to try to thwart the actual democratic system that we use to handle our elections. And this is why Fox News leans so hard into, okay, we're going to try to find every nook and cranny that we can to try to insinuate that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 elections. And we're going to go as far to insinuate that a voting machine was made in Venezuela, or whatever these terms are that they're using, these fraudulent claims. And good for Dominion for coming forward, filing this lawsuit, taking it all the way to the bank, because the bottom line is, if we don't have this kind of case as a landmark decision, more and more of this will happen in 2024. So we've got to try to do whatever we can now. And that includes private sector businesses that have been fraudulently impacted by false claims on Fox News. They have to go forward and take this all the way to the courts. You can't settle. You've got to actually prove that Fox News and some of these outlier fringe networks cannot use their bully pulpit to try to, subvert democracy by blaming it on some sort of voting machine. It's crazy.
Joyce, talk to me about what Adrienne just brought up, which is the legal threshold here that Dominion has to establish within the court if they do, in fact, push this all the way through trial. What is the legal threshold? How does that trial proceed?
So these sorts of cases aren't entirely uncommon. This is what I would call a business libel or a business defamation case. Pipe companies bring these against competitors who maybe denigrate their pipes. What's so unusual here is the fact that the defendant is obviously, a major network station. And that doesn't really alter the proof very much. In defamation cases where the plaintiff is a public figure, then there's a much heightened standard for proof. But here what Dominion needs to establish is that there were some false statements made about their business, that they actually reached out to Fox and to the defendants, and they asked them to take it back, and that they failed to do so. That's the prerequisite to bringing this sort of a lawsuit. And so that means at trial, the sorts of proof that they have to offer is that the statements were false, perhaps that they were knowingly false. That certainly amps up the proof, and then talk about the damage that was done to them. These are cases that typically don't go to trial. Every once in a while, one will, though. I recall that Pat Robertson was involved in a libel case saying that he had been defamed by the Washington Post and others. And his case, which was slated to go to trial on Super Tuesday when he was running as a candidate for the presidency, ultimately settled because he said he couldn't be involved in both a political run and a lawsuit at the same time. These are engrossing matters when they're political, and this one will certainly be very carefully watched.